Oh, hell no!
Hello? When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you.
For months, the single mother had been receiving calls from the unidentified caller. She thought the voice sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Dorothy and her 4-year-old son, Sean, had been receiving the threatening calls at her aunt's home in Stanton, California, where they were living.
Hello? Hi, baby. How was shopping today? I'm watching you. In fact, go outside. I have something special for you.
The calls unsettled and intimidated Scott and her family, but no one was quite sure what to do about them, so they went unreported. On the night of May 28, 1980, Scott dropped her son off with her parents in Anaheim so that she could attend a staff meeting where she worked. During the meeting, she noticed that one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostrom, didn't look well. She offered to take him to the hospital, and he took her up on the offer. And another co-worker, named Pamela Head, accompanied them. On the way to the hospital, Dorothy made a pit stop at her parents' house to check on her son. While there, Dorothy switched the black scarf she had been wearing for a red one on a whim. At the hospital, it was determined that Bostrom had been bitten by a black widow spider. He was treated while Scott and Head waited around until he was released ready to go home. According to Head, Scott never left her side during the evening. When Bostrom was released, Scott went out to the hospital parking lot to get her car, while Head and Bostrom waited inside to fill a prescription. When Scott didn't return right away, her two co-workers walked out to the parking lot. Nobody knows who or what Dorothy Jane Scott saw that night at her car. Her friends saw Scott's car speeding away, the headlights blinding them so that they couldn't see who was behind the wheel. And Dorothy was gone. The two friends initially assumed that some emergency had come up involving Scott's son, but when they still hadn't heard from her for a few hours, they reported her missing. Early the next morning, Scott's car, a white station wagon, was found in Santa Ana, 10 miles from the hospital. The car had been set ablaze, but no one was inside.
Hello.
Are you related to Dorothy Scott?
Yes I am. Who is this?
I've got her.
It was the first such call that Scott's parents received, but it wouldn't be the last. Though police installed a voice recorder at their residence, they were never able to trace the calls, as the caller never stayed on the line for more than a short time. Jacob Scott approached the Santa Ana Register, asking them to run a story about his missing daughter. The story ran June 12, 1980, and the same day the paper's editor received an anonymous call from someone claiming to be Dorothy Scott's killer.
She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her. She changed into her pretty red scarf for me. The itsy bitsy spider bit her coworker that evening. Then she called me that night from the hospital. That bitch loved me.
Over 4 years after the disappearance of Dorothy Scott, August 6, 1984, a construction crew discovered charred bones near Santana Canyon Road. The bones included human and dog remains side by side. Authorities believe the remains had been there for some time, as a brush fire had swept through the area in 1982 and likely caused this charred condition of the bones. Although no cause of death was able to be established, turquoise jewelry belonging to Scott were found with the remains, and the bones were identified as hers through dental records. Though the strange phone calls to Scott's family stopped around April 1984, they resumed again after Scott's remains were found in August. In spite of the killer's taunting calls, Scott's murder remains unsolved to this day. Plenty of information about this cold case exists online, including an interview with Sean Scott, Dorothy's son, who is now a grown man and has his own theories about possible suspects of his mother's murderer.